She didn't cry when they took her name. She didn't cry when the cameras flashed outside the courthouse, or when the headline read, "Barren Wife Discarded, Quan Air Finally Free." She stood on that cold soul sidewalk with one suitcase, 6 years of her life reduced to nothing, and she breathed. Just breathed. But here's what nobody told you. The man who destroyed her knew the truth all along. He knew. And he let her burn anyway. If you've ever been sacrificed by someone who was supposed to love you, stay with me. This story is for you. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this goes. The morning it ended, Amara Voss woke up before the alarm. That was unusual. For 6 years, she had trained herself to sleep until the very last possible second, to delay the moment when consciousness returned and with it the weight of everything she carried inside that house. But that Tuesday, she opened her eyes at 4:47 a.m. and stared at the ceiling of the master bedroom in Jae-min Kwan's Hanam Dong penthouse, and something in her chest already knew. Not the way people claim to know things in movies with some dramatic premonition. It was quieter than that, heavier, the way a body knows when it has been fighting too long and the fight is almost over. She lay still for 11 minutes. She counted them on the digital clock because there was nothing else to do with her hands. Jae-min was not beside her. He hadn't slept beside her in 4 months, and before that it had been irregular for 2 years, and before that it had been careful and clinical and joyless in a way that she had mistaken for discipline, for maturity. She had told herself that wealthy men in Korea were simply different, that love expressed itself differently here, that her expectations were too loud and too Western and too much. She had shrunk herself so many times to fit inside his silences that she sometimes forgot what her original shape had been. She got up, washed her face, looked at the mirror. The woman looking back was 31 years old, and she looked older. Not haggard. Amara had her mother's bone structure, which was the kind of thing that didn't collapse easily, but worn around the edges in a way that foundation couldn't fix. Her eyes were the problem. They used to have something bright in them, something her university roommate had called that stubborn shine. It was gone now. She wasn't sure exactly when it had left. She suspected it had been a gradual theft, one small humiliation at a time, spread across 6 years so that no single moment could be blamed. She dressed. She went downstairs. Jae-min was already in the dining room, which was itself wrong. He was never awake before 7. He sat at the head of the long table in a charcoal suit, his hands folded in front of him, and there were 2 men she didn't recognize sitting to his left with leather portfolios open in front of them. Lawyers. She knew what lawyers looked like in this house. She had learned. "Sit down, Amara," Jae-min said. He didn't look up from the table when he said it. She sat. She placed her hands flat on her thighs because she had discovered years ago that this kept them from shaking visibly. "We're filing for divorce," he said. "The paperwork is already prepared. These gentlemen represent our family's legal interests. You'll want to review the settlement offer." Our family. She had never once been included in that phrase when it mattered. One of the lawyers slid a document across the table toward her. She didn't touch it. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "That's not relevant." "It's relevant to me." Jae-min finally looked at her. His face was handsome and controlled and completely empty of anything resembling guilt. That was the thing about Jae-min Kwan. He had spent his entire life being told that whatever he did was correct by virtue of his doing it. Guilt required a certain belief that you could be wrong. He had never developed that belief. "The family has decided," he said, "given the circumstances." The circumstances. 6 years of trying, 6 years of clinics and schedules and temperature charts, and the particular cruelty of hope that keeps arriving and then disappearing, arriving and disappearing, until the hope itself starts to feel like a form of punishment. 6 years of his mother's eyes tracking her body at every family dinner like she was livestock that wasn't producing. 6 years of being the foreign wife, the black woman from Cape Town who had come to Seoul for a graduate exchange program and fallen in love with a man who had shown her, in those early months, something that looked enough like tenderness that she had believed it. "The circumstances," she repeated. "Amara." His voice dropped half a register, not into softness, but into the specific tone he used when he wanted her to understand that the conversation was over. You haven't been able to give this family a child. That is a fact. The decision has been made. Please don't make this complicated. Something happened in her chest then. Not breaking. She had expected breaking, had braced for it. This was different. This was a kind of cold clarification, like a lens snapping into focus. She looked at Jae-min Kwon and she saw him completely, maybe for the first time. And what she saw was a man who had always known exactly what he was doing and had never once lost a night's sleep over any of it. She picked up the settlement document. Read the first page. Set it back down. This barely covers a year's living expenses, she said. It's generous given... Given what? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Given that I left my country for you? Given that I spent 6 years being tested and prodded and blamed for something that neither of us could control? Given that your mother has told every person in her social circle that I am defective? She paused. What exactly is it generous given, Jae-min? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the lawyers. Add 15%, he said to them. Then he stood up and buttoned his jacket and walked out of his own dining room, and that was how 6 years ended, with his back disappearing through a door while 2 strangers with leather portfolios watched her sit alone at a table long enough to seat 20 people. She didn't cry, not there, not in front of them. She signed the document 2 hours later, after a lawyer named Park something or other explained 3 times that she was waiving rights she didn't fully understand, and she didn't fight it because fighting would have required a kind of energy she no longer possessed. She had used all of it surviving the marriage. She had nothing left for the divorce. The story broke that same afternoon. She didn't know how. Later, she would understand that it had been coordinated, that the Kwon family's publicist had prepared the narrative weeks in advance, had fed it to 3 entertainment reporters simultaneously so that it would be everywhere before she had time to respond. The headline that ran fastest, the one that got shared 40,000 times before midnight, was simple and surgical: Kwon Jae-min files for divorce. After years of failed attempts, wife unable to conceive. There was a photograph of her that someone had taken outside the building that afternoon. She hadn't noticed the photographer. She looked exhausted in the photo and slightly lost, and the comments under it were the kind of things she made herself read only once before putting her phone face down on the bed and not picking it up again for 3 hours. She flew home to Cape Town 5 days later. Her parents met her at the airport. Her mother, Dora, held her for a long time at arrivals, and for one brief moment Amara let herself believe that she had come home to something solid. Her father, Edmund, patted her shoulder twice with the careful awkwardness of a man who had never quite known what to do with a daughter who felt things as loudly as Amara did. She let herself be driven home. She let herself sit at the family table and drink rooibos tea and not talk about any of it for one whole evening. The conversation she had been dreading came the next morning over breakfast. Her father set down his fork with the careful deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed this. Her mother didn't look up from her tea. "The business is in trouble," Edmund said. Amara looked at him. "How much trouble?" "The kind we can't get out of alone." He cleared his throat. "Ronnie's contracts fell through. The warehouse loan is overdue. We've been managing, but..." He stopped. Started again. "There's been an offer." She felt the floor shift under her in some internal way. What kind of offer? Her mother finally looked up. Dora Voss had the same bone structure as her daughter, the same quality of face that held its composure almost too well, made you think everything was fine when nothing was fine at all. "A good family," she said. "A respected family. They approached your Uncle Ronnie first, through business connections." "Mom?" Amara's voice was very quiet. "What are you telling me?" "He is a widower," her father said, "very established, based in..." "Stop." She put her hand flat on the table. "Stop right there and look at me, both of you." They looked at her. "I just got on a plane from Korea," she said. "I just left a marriage that ate 6 years of my life. I came home because I thought..." She stopped, swallowed. "I came home." "We know," her mother said. "Do you? Because it sounds like you've already decided something without telling me." "Amara." Her father's voice had that quality she had hated since childhood, the one that dressed authority up as reason. "We are trying to give you a future. What is waiting for you here? You're divorced. Your reputation is..." My reputation. The word came out like a stone. My reputation that your future son-in-law and his family deliberately destroyed. That reputation. Neither of them answered. She sat there looking at the two people who were supposed to be her safe place, and she understood something that she had been refusing to understand for years, that she had never truly been their daughter in the way she needed to be. She had been, from the beginning, a resource, something to be invested and returned. "Tell me his name," she said finally, because she was tired and she was alone and she had nowhere else to go, and sometimes the only honest thing left to do is to look clearly at the thing in front of you. "Cassian Ryker," her father said. She didn't know the name. She looked it up that night on her phone in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the faded remnants of a girlhood she could barely remember belonging to. The results came back immediately and thoroughly, the way they do for people with a certain kind of wealth and reputation. Cassian Ryker, 40 years old, South African born, now based in Seoul. There was that city again, she thought, reaching back for her. Chairman of Ryker Capital Holdings. Estimated net worth that the financial press disagreed on, but agreed was substantial. Widower. 3 children. There was a photo from a business conference 2 years ago. He was tall, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, and he wore the particular expression of a man who had long ago stopped caring whether anyone in the room liked him. Not cruel, just impermeable, like someone had built him out of material that didn't absorb things the way normal people did. She scrolled further, found a small paragraph buried in a business profile that mentioned his wife, Serena, who had died 3.5 years ago. Cerebral hemorrhage. Sudden. She had been 34. Amara set the phone down on her chest and stared at the ceiling of her childhood room. A widower with 3 children. A man who had lost something real. She thought she understood loss, or at least she understood a particular variety of it. The slow kind. The kind that happens one subtraction at a time over years. She didn't know yet what the sudden kind did to a person, what it left behind when it was finished. She closed her eyes but didn't sleep for a long time. The meeting was arranged within a week because her parents moved quickly when money was involved. It happened at a restaurant in the waterfront that was the kind of quiet and expensive that announced itself without trying. Amara wore a dark green dress that her sister had lent her because most of her own clothes were still in transit from Seoul, and she sat at the table 10 minutes early and drank water and told herself she was not nervous. She was nervous. He arrived exactly on time, which she would later understand was characteristic. He was taller in person than the photographs had suggested, which was unusual. Photographs usually flattered height. He sat down without extending his hand, which surprised her, and he looked at her across the table with dark eyes that were direct in a way that felt almost aggressive after a week of being looked at sideways. "I won't waste your time with small talk," he said. His voice was low and carried no particular warmth but also no performance. "I assume you've looked me up." "I have," she said. "Then, you know I have 3 children who are 7 years old and who have had a difficult few years. I need someone in that house who can be a consistent presence for them. That is the primary function of what I'm proposing." "Primary function," she repeated. Something shifted slightly in his expression, not quite discomfort, but an awareness that the phrasing had landed somewhere. "I'm not interested in a romantic arrangement," he said. "I was married to someone I loved. I'm not looking to replace that. I want honesty more than I want comfort." "What does it pay?" she asked. He blinked. It was the only time she would see him caught off guard in that first meeting. "I'm sorry?" "You said it's a function. Functions have compensation. What does it pay?" He studied her for a moment. Then something happened at the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, more like a recognition, one wary thing identifying another. "Room, board, full financial security, a monthly allowance at a level I expect you'll find adequate, and the legal protection of the Ryker name, which given your current public situation is not nothing." It wasn't nothing. She knew it wasn't nothing. The Kwon story had followed her across an ocean. The comments under that airport photograph were still generating new cruelty on a daily basis, and she was still receiving messages from journalists, and her parents' home was not a refuge, and Cape Town was not big enough to disappear into, and she had 31 years of her life, a postgraduate degree, and approximately nothing that resembled a next step. "I have one condition," she said. What is it? She leaned forward slightly. You never use me as a prop. At events? In the press? With your family? If you make a decision that involves me publicly, you tell me before you make it. I have spent 6 years being used as a prop, and I am not doing that again. The silence lasted long enough that she started to think she had overstepped. Then he said, Agreed. And I want it in the contract. I'll have my lawyers draft specific language. She sat back, looked at him across the white linen and the untouched breadbasket. He looked back. Two people taking accurate measure of each other with the particular exhaustion of people who have already learned, through significant personal cost, what happens when you measure wrong. All right, Amar said. All right, Cassian repeated. Neither of them said anything like this will work or I think this could be good, because neither of them believed in that kind of language anymore. They shook hands, properly, finally, and the grip was firm and lasted exactly the right amount of time and communicated nothing except that both of them would keep their word. She flew back to Seoul 3 weeks later. Different circumstances, same city. The Ryker estate was in Seongbuk-dong, tucked behind walls and trees in a way that made the city noise recede. The house itself was large in the way that old money is large, not showboating, just inevitable, as though it had always occupied exactly this much space. A housekeeper named Mrs. Yoon met her at the door with the careful neutrality of a woman who had seen several versions of this situation and had opinions about all of them that she intended to keep to herself. Cassian wasn't home. He had a board meeting. He had left a note, an actual handwritten note, which surprised her, that said the children would return from school at 4 and that dinner was at 6:30 and that she should consider the house her home. She stood in the front hallway with her 2 suitcases and read that note twice. Consider the house your home, as though home were something that could be assigned. She had 3 hours before 4 o'clock. She used them to walk through the rooms quietly, not snooping but orienting, building a map of the space the way she had always done in new places. She found the library, which was beautiful and real, actual books, red ones with broken spines, not decor. She found the kitchen, which was large and well-equipped and smelled faintly of the morning's coffee. She found what had clearly been Serena's study, the door slightly open, a room that no one had touched in a way that was obvious from the doorway, the specific stillness of a space that people were afraid to disturb. She did not go in. She was standing in the garden when she heard the gate, and then the voices, and then 3 7-year-olds came around the side of the house, with a young driver trailing behind them and stopped dead when they saw her. They were identical in the way that triplets can be while still being completely distinct. Elias was the tallest by a fraction, with his father's directness already visible in his face at 7 years old. Nora stood slightly apart from her brothers with her arms crossed and an expression that was too old for her face. Micah was half hidden behind Elias, watching Amara with enormous dark eyes that had a quality she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror. The particular vigilance of someone who has learned that unexpected things can happen. "Hi," Amara said. None of them said anything. "I'm Amara. I'll be living here." Elias looked at her the way his father had looked at her across the restaurant table, with that same unflinching directness. "We know who you are," he said. "We looked you up." She almost smiled. Almost. "And?" she said. "The internet says you're divorced," Nora said from behind her crossed arms. "It does, that's true." "Why?" Elias asked. "That's a long story." "We have time," he said. And there it was. 7 years old and already his father's son, cutting straight to the thing, refusing the comfortable deflection. She looked at the 3 of them standing in the garden of their dead mother's house, stiff with the particular bravado of children who have learned that the surest defense is to strike first. And something moved in Amara's chest. Not pity. Something more complicated than pity. "Not today," she said. "But I won't lie to you. If you ask me something I can answer, I'll answer it." Nora uncrossed her arms, crossed them again immediately, as if she'd caught herself. "Are you going to try to be our mom?" Micah asked from behind Elias's shoulder. His voice was smaller than his siblings, softer, and it carried the question like it weighed something. Amara looked at him for a long moment. The honest answer was complicated. The easy answer was a lie. She was so tired of lies that she didn't even consider it. "No," she said, "I'm not going to try to be anything. I'm just going to be here. And I'll try to be someone worth knowing. The rest is up to you." Elias looked at her for 5 full seconds. Then he walked past her into the house without a word, and Nora followed him, and Micah went last. But Micah, just before he went through the door, looked back at her once over his shoulder. She didn't know yet what that look meant. She didn't know yet that it would be Micah who would break first, who would come to her room at 2 a.m. 3 weeks from now with nightmares and grief and no language for either, and that the way she handled that one night would change everything. She didn't know any of that yet. She stood in the garden of a house that wasn't her home and looked at the door the children had gone through and breathed the cold soul air into her lungs, and she thought, "I have survived worse." What she didn't know was that behind the wall at the far end of the garden, a car had pulled up. Cassian Ryker had come home early from his board meeting for the first time in 3 years. He stood on the other side of the garden wall, and he had heard the whole thing, every word she had said to his children. And he stood there with his hand on the gate latch and didn't open it for a long time. Something was happening in him that he did not yet have a name for. He was not a man who moved quickly toward things he didn't understand. He would take his time. He would watch. He would wait. But he had heard her say, "I'm not going to try to be anything. I'm just going to be here." And for reasons he could not explain and would spend weeks refusing to examine, those 12 words were the first thing that had cracked something open in him since the morning he had buried his wife. He opened the gate. He walked into the garden. And the door to whatever came next swung open behind him, quiet as a held breath. Cassian Ryker did not announce himself when he walked into his own kitchen. He set his briefcase on the counter, loosened his tie with 2 fingers, and stood in the doorway watching Amara try to figure out where Mrs. Yoon kept the cutting boards. She had opened 3 wrong cabinets before she found it. She didn't notice him until she turned around, and then she startled. Not dramatically, just a quick catch in her breath, a half step backward that she controlled immediately. "You're early," she said. "Board meeting ended." He moved to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there looking at its contents with the blankness of a man who had forgotten why he opened it. "You don't have to cook." "I know I don't have to." "Mrs. Yoon handles dinner." "Mrs. Yoon left at 3:30 because her daughter called." Amara set the cutting board on the counter. "I found chicken. I'm making something." He looked at the chicken, looked at her, closed the refrigerator. "The children?" he asked. "Upstairs. Elias is doing homework, I think. Nora shut her door. Micah is—" She paused. "Micah is sitting outside Nora's door in the hallway, just sitting there." Something moved through Cassian's face. Too fast to read, but she caught it. He set his jaw and looked at the ceiling for a half second, and then back at her. "That's new," he said, and his voice had gone flat in a specific way that wasn't coldness. It was the flatness of a person pressing down on something that would otherwise be unbearable. "Is it?" she asked carefully. "He used to do that with Serena's, with the bedroom." He stopped. He'd sit outside it for hours after she died. We thought he'd stopped. Amara turned back to the counter and picked up the knife and started on the garlic. She didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say, and she had learned in a very different context that sometimes silence was the only honest response to grief. "I heard you," Cassian said. "In the garden, earlier." Her hands didn't stop moving. "I know. I heard you come in." A pause. "You didn't say anything," he said. "You weren't ready to come in yet." She scraped the garlic off the board. "So I waited." He stood there for a moment longer, and she could feel him looking at the back of her head with that assessing directness that seemed to be simply how he occupied space. Then he picked up his briefcase and went upstairs, and she let out a slow breath through her nose and kept cooking. Dinner that first night was the kind of quiet that had texture to it. Elias ate with his eyes on his plate. Nora rearranged her food with systematic precision and ate almost none of it. Micah sat between his siblings like a small ship trying not to get caught between 2 larger vessels, and he ate carefully and didn't speak, but twice he glanced up at Amara across the table with those watchful eyes, and both times she met his look without flinching, and both times he looked away first. Cassian ate. He asked Elias one question about school. a specific question about a history project, which told Amara he paid attention, that this was not a man phoning in fatherhood from a distance. Elias answered in complete sentences. Nora said nothing unprompted. After dinner, Nora helped clear the table. Not because anyone asked her to, she just did it, efficient and silent, like a child who had decided that controlling the small tasks was the only power available to her. Amara watched her carry plates to the kitchen and thought, this one is going to be the hardest. Not because she is mean, because she is the most scared. 3 days passed before the first real incident. Amara had been using the small bathroom off the hallway rather than the master suite bathroom, because the master suite still had Serena's things in it. Not all of them, but enough. A bottle of something on the counter, a silk robe on the hook behind the door. She had not mentioned this to Cassian, and she did not intend to. She understood what it meant to leave things in place. It meant, I am not ready. She respected not ready. But on the fourth morning, she came downstairs to find her toiletry bag, which she had left on the bathroom counter, sitting outside the bathroom door, placed there deliberately. Every item still inside it, nothing damaged, but the message was precise and unmistakable. She picked it up, stood there in the hallway for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee. At breakfast, all 3 children were at the table when she came in. Nora was eating toast. Elias was reading something on a tablet. Micah was looking at his cereal. Amara poured her coffee, sat down at the far end of the table, and said nothing about the bag. She felt Nora watching her from beneath her eyelashes. Waiting. Amara drank her coffee. Read a news article on her phone. The silence stretched, and Nora's waiting got visibly more tense, the way silence does when someone is expecting a reaction and not getting it. Finally, Nora said, "The small bathroom is for guests." "Okay," Amara said without looking up. "Guests don't live here." Amara looked up then. She looked at Nora directly, and Nora met her gaze with all the armor a 7-year-old could assemble, which was actually considerable. "You're right," Amara said. "I'll use the upstairs bathroom." Nora blinked. She had been ready for an argument. The agreement landed wrong. "The upstairs one near the library?" Nora said, recalibrating. "That one's Elias's." "Is that true?" Amara asked Elias. Elias looked up from his tablet. Something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a quick assessment. "I mean, I use it sometimes." "Then I'll ask Mrs. Yoon about the one near the back stairs," Amara said, and went back to her coffee. Nora stared at her for a full 4 seconds. Then she picked up her toast and bit into it with more force than necessary, and said nothing else. Micah, across the table, exhaled very quietly. Amara heard it. The campaign was not subtle, and it was not unified. Nora operated on strategy, the kind of deliberate, targeted pressure that 7-year-olds deploy when they are genuinely intelligent and genuinely frightened. Amara's clothes, which she had begun hanging in the hallway closet temporarily, started appearing refolded. Not disturbed, not damaged, but refolded wrong, so that she would know someone had touched them. Her book, a worn paperback she'd been reading before all of this started, appeared on the wrong shelf. Small dislocations. The message, every time. You don't belong here, and we will keep reminding you until you leave. Elias kept his distance differently. He was not cruel. He was simply absent, present in every room and body and completely unreachable in every other way. He answered questions with the exact minimum number of words required. He was polite the way cold weather is polite, technically not attacking you, just making you aware that it could. Micah said almost nothing for the first 10 days. He observed everything. At the end of the first week, Cassian called her into his study. The study was his room in the way the kitchen was Mrs. Yoon's room. Clearly defined territory, ordered to a specific logic, everything in a place that meant something. He was standing behind his desk when she came in, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he had a look on his face like a man about to conduct a business review. "How are you finding it?" he asked. "You mean the children," she said. "I mean everything." She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited to, which she could tell he noticed. "It's fine." "Amara." "It's hard," she said. "But I'm not complaining." "I'm not asking you to complain. I'm asking for an honest report." She looked at him. "Nora moved my things twice this week. Elias hasn't spoken to me voluntarily, Micah watches me like he's waiting to see what I'll do next. She paused. They're grieving and they're scared, and they're doing exactly what children do when they're grieving and scared. None of it is a surprise. He was quiet for a moment. And nothing. I'm not going anywhere. Something tightened at the corner of his jaw. Not anger, more like the involuntary response of a man who had braced for a different answer. The last woman. He stopped. The last woman, she prompted. We had someone before you, a hired caregiver. Nora made her life difficult enough that she left inside a month. He said it flatly, not as an apology and not as a warning, just as information. Noted, Amara said. You're not worried. Oh, I'm worried, she said. I'm just not leaving. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, with the short precision of a man who was reassessing something, and she understood the meeting was over and she left. The night that changed the shape of everything happened on a Wednesday, 17 days in. She woke to a sound she couldn't immediately identify, small and rhythmic, coming from the hallway. She lay still for a moment with her eyes open in the dark, listening with the instinct that wakes people at the sound of children in distress, even when the child isn't theirs. Then she got up. Micah was sitting on the floor outside her door. He was wearing pajamas with small rocket ships on them, and he had his knees drawn up to his chest, and he was breathing in the uneven pattern of a child who has been crying for long enough that the crying has gone quiet, but the body hasn't finished yet. He looked up when she opened the door, and there was a half second where he looked like he might bolt. That flight response, wild and fast. And then he didn't. She sat down on the floor beside him, not touching him, just beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. The dream again? She asked eventually. She didn't know it was again, but something told her it was. He nodded. His breathing was still jagged at the edges. Same one? Another nod. You don't have to tell me what it is. He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to. Then he said, in a voice worn thin by sleep and crying, She's in it. But when I try to get to her, she keeps going further away, and I run, but I can't. He stopped. His throat worked. Amara did not say she's watching over you or she's at peace or any of the other things that people say when they are trying to fill silence with comfort and end up filling it with distance instead. She said nothing. She just sat there on the cold hallway floor with her back against the wall and let him be in the dream's aftermath without pushing him out of it too quickly. After a while, his breathing evened out. My mom used to smell like this soap, he said. Lavender. I can't find it anywhere. Amara's chest tightened. She kept her face neutral. What kind of soap? I don't know. Mrs. Yoon said they stopped making it. He rubbed his face with the back of his hand. It's stupid. It's not stupid. Elias says it is. Elias is wrong sometimes, she said. So is everyone. He turned his head and looked at her sideways. His eyes were still wet and enormous, and he looked so much younger than 7 that she had to work to keep her expression even. Are you scared of us? He asked. She considered lying, decided against it. A little. I'm scared of doing the wrong thing. He seemed to think about this seriously. Nora's going to keep being mean. I know. You're not going to leave? She met his eyes. No. He looked at her for a long moment with the particular gravity of a child taking an adult at their word and knowing exactly what they're risking by doing it. Then he said, Okay, in a very small voice, and leaned his head sideways just slightly against her arm. She didn't move. She sat there on the floor and felt the small weight of him against her, and something in her chest quietly broke open in a way that wasn't pain. She didn't know that Cassian's bedroom was at the end of that hallway. She didn't know he'd heard Micah's door open at 2 a.m. and had gotten up and come to the hallway and stopped when he saw the two of them on the floor. She didn't know he stood there for 4 minutes in the dark, watching his youngest son breathe normally for the first time in weeks, watching a woman he barely knew choose the floor over comfort. She didn't know any of that. Nora found out about the 2 a.m. hallway incident the next morning. Amara wasn't sure who told her, probably Micah himself, incapable of hiding anything. But the finding out turned Nora's strategy from cold to something with an edge. It was a Saturday, 2 weeks and 5 days in. Amara had done the grocery run with Mrs. Yoon, and when she came back there was mud on her white coat. The coat had been hanging in the hallway closet. The mud was very precisely applied, not splashed, but smeared, in a pattern that suggested deliberate effort. She stood in the hallway holding the coat and did not yell. She set it down, went upstairs, knocked on Nora's door. "Come in," Nora said, with the voice of someone who had been waiting. Amara opened the door and stood in the frame and looked at Nora, who was sitting on her bed with a book she was very clearly not reading. "You ruined my coat," Amara said. Nora looked at her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Silence. "Nora." Amara's voice was not raised, and it was not warm. It was level in the way that things are level before they tip. "I have not come into your room. I have not moved your things. I have not tried to sit in your mother's chair, or use her mug, or take anything that belonged to her. I have done nothing to you except be here, and I am going to keep being here." She paused. "But I need you to understand that I see exactly what you're doing. I see you, and I'm still not leaving." Nora's face did something complicated. Her jaw set hard and her eyes went bright in the particular way eyes go bright when a child is fighting tears they refuse to shed. She looked down at the book in her lap. "Everyone leaves," she said. Very quiet, almost not meant to be heard. The two words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Amara stood in the doorway and looked at this 7-year-old girl, with her mother's absence carved into every defensive line of her body, and she felt the weight of it. The full specific weight of being a child who has learned that love is a prelude to abandonment. "Not me," Amara said. Nora didn't look up. Amara didn't push. She pulled the door closed quietly and stood in the hallway and put her back against the wall and closed her eyes for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. Then she straightened up and went back downstairs. She was in the kitchen an hour later when Cassian came home. He looked at her face and something sharpened in his expression. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing I can't handle." "Amara." She turned from the counter. There was a tiredness in her that she usually managed to keep out of her face, but today it had gotten through. "Nora put mud on my coat." He went very still. "I talked to her," Amara said quickly. "It's fine." "It's not fine." His voice dropped into a register that was very controlled and very cold, and she understood suddenly why people found him frightening in a boardroom. "I'll speak to her." "Don't." He looked at her sharply. "If you go in there now, you punish her, and she learns that I report to you and you discipline on my behalf, and I become someone she resents instead of someone she can eventually trust." She held his gaze. "Let me handle it." That was the arrangement. The silence between them had a pressure to it. He was a man who solved things. She could see that clearly. Who identified problems and removed them with precision, who found the idea of standing back while something in his house caused damage genuinely difficult to tolerate. "She said everyone leaves," Amara said quietly. The pressure in his face changed, shifted into something rawer. "Yeah," he said, rough at the edges. "She's been saying that since she was 5. They stood in the kitchen with that between them, and neither of them moved. This was the first time Amara understood what they actually had in common. Not the contract, not the arrangement, not the careful negotiated terms of a marriage built on necessity. It was this. Both of them knew exactly what it felt like to be left by someone who should have stayed. "Cassian." She said his name carefully, the first time she had said it without it feeling strange in her mouth. "She's going to be all right. I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to let me keep showing up." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his eyes, quick and unguarded, gone before she could catalog it, and then he nodded. "Once." He was at the kitchen door when he stopped. "The lavender soap," he said without turning around. "Serena's. I had Mrs. Yoon look into it. There's a small batch supplier in Busan who makes something close." He paused. "I ordered some. It should arrive Thursday." Amara's breath caught. He walked out before she could say anything. She stood in the kitchen alone and pressed her fingers against the edge of the counter and held on because something was moving in her chest that she didn't have the vocabulary for yet, and she wasn't ready to look at it directly. Thursday came. The soap arrived in a small brown package. Amara left it on the counter outside Micah's bathroom without a note, without explanation. She watched from the hallway when he found it. She watched him pick it up and open it carefully. The way you open something you are afraid will disappoint you. She watched him hold it up and breathe it in. She watched his face do something that had no name she could give it. Then Micah sat down on the bathroom floor, right there, holding the soap, and cried with the full unguarded grief of a child who has finally found something he thought was gone forever. Amara pressed her back against the hallway wall and looked at the ceiling and blinked hard. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Elias standing at the top of the stairs. He had clearly just come from his room. He was still in his school uniform. He was looking at his brother through the open bathroom door, and the expression on his face was something Amara had not seen from him in nearly a month. Not the controlled distance, not the careful watchfulness, but something undefended and young and aching. He looked at Amara. She looked back. "How did you know?" he asked, quietly. "Your father," she said. Elias absorbed this. His jaw worked slightly. He looked back at Micah on the bathroom floor and something in his shoulders dropped. 1 millimeter, almost nothing, but she caught it. "He remembered," Elias said. Half to her, half to himself. She didn't answer. She moved past him quietly and went downstairs and left the brothers to that moment because some things needed to happen without an audience. She was almost to the kitchen when her phone buzzed. An unknown Korean number. She answered out of habit and heard a voice she recognized before the first sentence was finished. It was Jae-min's younger brother, Tae-min, the one who had always watched her at family dinners with an expression that combined contempt and curiosity in equal measure. His voice was friendly in the performative way of someone who knows they are about to say something hostile. "Amara, see?" he said. "I heard you've landed on your feet. Quick work, even for you." She stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" she said. Not a question. "We have resources." A pause, easy and comfortable. "There's something you should know about the Ryker arrangement. Some people in our family circle know Cassian, know him well, and they have some thoughts about whether a woman with your specific history is the right person to be around his children." Her stomach went cold. "There's going to be a piece," Tae-min continued, "a profile. Some investigative outlet. They've been looking into your medical history, your background. Some of the doctors who treated you during your marriage have been—" He paused delicately. "Cooperative." The cold in her stomach spread upward. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because I want you to know it's coming," he said, "so you can make a decision before it gets messy. Walk away from the Ryker situation quietly, no drama, and we'll make sure the piece doesn't run." Another pause. "Or stay, and watch everything burn." The line went quiet. He hadn't hung up. He was waiting. She stood in the hallway of Cassian Ryker's house with the sound of Micah's muffled crying still audible from upstairs, and Elias's footsteps moving back toward his room, and the weight of that threat sitting in her chest like a stone, and she thought about walking away. She let herself think about it fully and honestly for exactly 10 seconds. What it would cost, what it would spare, what version of herself she would be on the other side of that choice. Then she said, "Run it," and ended the call. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and stood in the hallway and breathed. And upstairs the house was quiet now, and she understood with complete clarity that she had just made a decision that she could not unmake. Whatever was coming, and she had chosen to stand in front of it instead of away from it. And there was no version of what happened next that was going to be anything but hard. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that the medical records Tae-min was planning to weaponize contained a buried truth that the Kwon family had spent 6 years and an extraordinary amount of money making sure would never surface. And that truth, once it broke into the open, was not going to destroy her. It was going to destroy them. The article dropped at 6:47 on a Friday morning. Amara knew because her phone started vibrating at 6:48 and didn't stop. She was already awake. She had not slept past 5 a.m. in 3 weeks, her body having decided that this new life required constant low-level vigilance. and she was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee she hadn't touched when the first notification came through. Then the second. Then the third, fourth, fifth, in rapid succession, the way notifications arrive when something has already gone beyond the point of containment. She opened the article. The headline was, "Billionaire Ryker's New Wife, the Woman. 2 families rejected and why." She read it the way you read something you already know will hurt you, quickly, to get the damage over with, the way you pull a bandage. The piece was thorough, and it was surgical, and it had clearly been written by someone who understood exactly how to present facts in an order that produced a specific conclusion without technically lying. Her marriage to Jayamin, the 6 years of failed fertility treatments, the divorce, the public humiliation, the speed of her subsequent marriage to Cassian, framed as suspicious, the timeline laid out in a way that implied calculation on her part. There were quotes from anonymous sources who described her as opportunistic and cold, and not the kind of woman you want around grieving children. There was a photograph of her at the airport in Seoul the day the divorce broke. The same one, the one where she looked lost, and beneath it a caption that read, "A woman with a pattern." There was also a paragraph near the bottom that made her set the phone down on the table with a careful deliberateness that was the only thing standing between her and something she couldn't take back. The paragraph cited an unnamed doctor who had treated her during her marriage. It described her fertility test results in clinical language that was precise enough to be credible and vague enough to be unverifiable. It concluded that the medical evidence suggested the fertility issues in the Kwon marriage had been, quote, primarily attributable to the wife. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked the phone back up and called the one lawyer she trusted, a woman named Adayeze, who had helped her navigate the divorce settlement and who operated on the principle that information was the only weapon worth carrying. Adayeze picked up on the second ring. "I've seen it," she said without preamble. "The doctor quoted," Amara said. "Can we identify them?" "Working on it. The language in that paragraph is specific enough that it narrows the field. There were 4 physicians who had access to your complete file during the marriage." A pause. "Amara, the Kwon family paid for all 4 of them." The kitchen was very quiet. "All 4, Amara repeated. "Every clinic you went to during those 6 years, the initial referrals came through the Kwon family's network. We didn't flag it at the time because it seemed like a resource thing. They had connections. They used them. But if they owned the doctors..." Adayeze stopped. "Let the implication sit." Amara stared at the table, the wood grain. The small scratch near the edge that one of the children had made, she didn't know which one. She focused on it. "They could have been falsifying results," she said. Her voice came out very flat. "For 6 years, Adayeze said. "Yes." The flatness in her voice was not shock. It was the specific quality of a person whose worst suspicion has just been confirmed, which is different from shock. It's heavier because there's no disbelief to cushion it. She had known, in some deep wordless part of herself that she had never let get loud, that something had been wrong, that the results had never quite added up, that Jayamin's certainty about where the fault lay had been too immediate, too complete, too convenient. She had known, and she had not let herself know. "I need to understand something," she said, "and I need you to be honest with me. Always. If the records were falsified, if the Kwon family paid 4 doctors to alter my test results and present me as the source of the problem, is there any way to prove it, legally, specifically?" Adayeze was quiet for 3 seconds. "Possibly. Medical record fraud is serious. If we can get access to the original raw data before it was interpreted and reported, the actual lab values, and compare them to what was submitted in the official records, discrepancies would be detectable. But the Kwons have had 6 years to clean this up." "They didn't know we'd be looking," Amara said. "No," Adayeze said. "They didn't." "Start looking," Amara said, and ended the call. She sat for 4 more minutes in the empty kitchen. Then she washed her coffee cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, and went upstairs to wake the children for school. This was the part that people never understood about her, the capacity to move, to absorb something devastating and then stand up and do the next necessary thing. It was not strength in the way people used that word, not some noble resilience. It was simpler and uglier than that. It was the habit of a woman who had learned that falling apart was a luxury that was never available when she needed it, so she had stopped making space for it. Cassian was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she came back down. He had the article open on his phone. He was dressed for work, but he hadn't left, and the look on his face was the one she had not seen from him before. Not the boardroom coldness, not the controlled grief, but something with actual heat in it, banked down under that jaw-set composure, but visible if you knew what to look for, and she was beginning to know what to look for. "I need to know if this is going to be a problem," he said. The question landed wrong. She stopped on the second-to-last stair and looked at him. "Excuse me," she said. "The publicity, the narrative they're building." He held up the phone. "My children go to school. There are other parents. My board—" "Stop." Her voice was not loud. It was the kind of quiet that required active effort to maintain, and they both knew it. "You're asking if I'm going to embarrass you. I'm asking what we're walking into." "What we're walking into?" She came down the last stair and stood in front of him and held his gaze. "I got a threatening phone call 3 days ago from Jae-min's brother. He told me this article was coming and told me to leave quietly or he'd run it. I told him to run it." She paused. "I should have told you that immediately. I didn't. That's on me, and I'm sorry." Something shifted in his expression. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd make the same calculation Taemin wanted you to make." She said it straight, without softening it. That the clean solution was for me to go. The silence between them was not comfortable, and she didn't try to make it comfortable. She stood there and let him look at her and let the question sit between them because it was a real question and it deserved a real moment. "Is any of it true?" he asked. "What the article says about the fertility?" "No." The word was simple and absolute. "And I'm going to prove it. My lawyer is already working on it." He looked at her for a long time. She could not read everything happening in his face. There were too many layers and she hadn't known him long enough to have all the keys. But she could read the central thing, and the central thing was that he was deciding. "All right," he said finally. "That's it?" she said. "What else do you want me to say?" She studied him. "I want you to say it because you believe me, not because it's the efficient position." Something moved through his face. Something that cost him. She could see that it cost him. The specific expense of a man opening a door he had trained himself to keep closed. "I believe you," he said. Not performed, not managed, just said. She nodded once. He picked up his jacket and left for work. She stood in the hallway alone and pressed her hand flat against her sternum for a moment, just feeling her own heartbeat, making sure it was still there. The school called at noon. Mrs. Yoon knocked on the study door where Amara had been working through documents Adiaze had sent, and her face had the particular careful neutrality of someone delivering news they know will not be welcome. Elias had gotten into a fight. Not a shoving match, a real one. Fists, a split lip, a boy in the year above him with a bruised jaw, and a mother who was already threatening to involve the school board. Amara got into the car before Mrs. Yoon finished explaining, and she was at the school in 11 minutes. The head teacher's office had a particular smell, industrial cleaner and old paper, and the faint residue of 100 previous difficult conversations. Elias was sitting in a chair outside it with an ice pack against his mouth. His uniform was torn at the collar. He was staring at the floor with the flat expression of someone who has finished feeling something and moved to the other side of it. He looked up when Amara came in. Something crossed his face. Not relief, but the involuntary response of a person who is surprised to see the right person show up. She sat down next to him. Not across from him. Next to him. "The other kid," she said quietly. "What did he say?" Elias's jaw tightened. He looked back at the floor. "Elias, what did he say?" A long pause. He showed his friends that article on his phone. His voice was very controlled in the way that voices are controlled when the thing underneath is not controlled at all. "He said you were a gold digger. He said you were only here for our money, and you couldn't even have kids, so you were worthless." He stopped. He said that's why our real mom died, because our family has bad luck with women. The silence in that hallway was total. Amara sat with it, sat with the specific quality of rage that comes when a child is used as a delivery system for adult cruelty, and she kept her face even because Elias needed even right now. He did not need her rage. He needed to see that the world had not actually ended, even when it felt that way. "You hit him," she said. "Yes." "And before you hit him, did you say anything?" Elias was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, "I said don't talk about my mom." She absorbed this. "Which mom?" she asked. Carefully. Very carefully. Elias looked up at her. His eyes were dark and exhausted and 7 years old and somewhere much older than that simultaneously. "Both," he said. She held his gaze and did not let anything collapse in her face, even though something very much wanted to. "Okay," she said, "here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go in there and talk to the head teacher. You're going to stay here. When I come out, we're going to go home. And tonight, we're going to have dinner, and it's going to be normal. Okay?" He looked at her. "Are you mad?" "At you? No." "At the kid?" "Yes," she said, "but that's not your problem." She stood up, straightened her jacket, went into the office. What she said to the head teacher in that room was not something she repeated afterward. What mattered was the outcome. Elias was suspended for 2 days, which was unavoidable, but the head teacher agreed to address the other students' behavior separately, and the conversation about the article and the boy who had displayed it to his peer group was noted in official school records. She made sure of that last part specifically. When she came out, Elias was standing, not sitting. He was looking out the hallway window at the school courtyard. He heard her and turned. 2 days, she said. He nodded. Is Dad going to... I'll tell him. She picked up her bag. Come on. They walked to the car in silence. He got in the back seat, which was where he always sat. She got in the front. The driver pulled out, and they were halfway home before Elias said, from the back seat, in a voice aimed somewhere at the window and not quite at her, "The article said you couldn't have children." She watched the street go by. It did. Is that true? We don't know yet, she said. We're finding out. Another silence. It doesn't matter, he said. Stiff, uncomfortable, like someone saying something they have decided to say before they fully knew they'd decided it. She turned and looked at him over her shoulder. He was looking out the window, jaw set in the exact way his father's jaw set. Thank you, she said. He shrugged, but the back of his neck went slightly red. Cassian came home at 6. He walked into the kitchen to find Amara at the counter with 3 laptops worth of documents spread between her and Adaez, who was on video call from Lagos, and dinner half made, and a list on the notepad that began with Elias. School incident and did not end there. She told him all of it. The school, the fight, what the boy had said. She told him clearly and without editorializing and watched his face move through controlled anger into something that was not controlled at all, briefly, before he pulled it back. I'll call the school, he said. I handled it. He was physically injured on school property because of a story about our family. Cassian. She held his gaze. Elias defended himself, and then he defended me. He handled more than most adults would have. Don't make it about the machinery. Make it about him. A silence. He's okay? Cassian asked. He's upstairs. He ate. He's reading. She paused. He called me Mom today. The word landed in the kitchen with a weight that changed the air quality. Cassian looked at her. What? Not to my face. He said, when he was defending me, he said he hit the other boy for talking about his moms. She kept her voice even. Plural. Cassian turned away from her. He put both hands on the counter and stood there with his back to her. And she watched his shoulders do something difficult, and she did not look away. And she did not fill the silence with anything. After a long moment, he said, Okay, in a voice she had not heard from him before. Lower, stripped of the management layer. Yeah, she said softly. He turned back. His face was composed again, but the eyes were not. Adayeze, the investigation. Where are we? Amara blinked. She hadn't told him Adayeze was on the call. She looked at the laptop screen and Adayeze was already nodding. We found something, Adayeze said. The room went still. One of the 4 clinics, the second one you used, Amara, in the 3rd year of your marriage, they switched records management systems in 2021. Old records got migrated to the new system, but the original raw lab data files were archived separately. Standard data migration practice. The Kwan's people cleaned the interpreted reports, but they didn't know about the archive. Adeze's voice was very steady. We got access to the original files this afternoon. Amara's hand had gone cold. And, Cassian said, the raw hormone panels, the ovarian reserve markers, the baseline FSH levels from the original testing. Amara, your numbers were normal. All of them. Completely within normal range for a woman your age at the time. A pause. The numbers in the official reports that were submitted, the ones the Kwan family doctors signed off on, are different. Materially different. Changed in ways that would require human intervention. The kitchen was absolutely silent.
Someone altered them, Amara said.
Someone altered them, Adeyeze confirmed. And given the pattern of changes, given what was adjusted and what direction it was adjusted in, our reproductive specialist consultant says the alterations were designed to indicate a specific condition, premature ovarian insufficiency. Another pause. Which you do not have. Which you never had. Amara sat down. She sat down because her legs had made the decision before she did. She sat in the kitchen chair and put both hands flat on the table and looked at her own hands and thought about 6 years. 6 years of being tested and found wanting. 6 years of Jaemin's mother's eyes. 6 years of the Kwan family dinner table where she had sat surrounded by people who knew, who had paid to make sure, that the story they were telling about her was a lie. She thought about every apology she had made, every moment she had turned inward and asked herself what she was doing wrong, every doctor's appointment she had attended alone because Jaemin was too busy, every version of herself she had dismantled trying to become someone who could give them what they wanted, not knowing that what she had been giving was already enough, had always been enough, and the numbers proving it had been sitting in an archive in a records migration server while she was slowly taken apart from the inside. Amara, Cassian's voice. She looked up. He was standing in front of her. He had moved while she was sitting down, and he was standing in front of her, and his face had the expression of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of something and is making himself look at it without flinching. Say it, she said. You were never the problem, he said. The sentence was simple and it was accurate, and it was the most devastating thing anyone had said to her in years because of what it implied about every year that had come before. She pressed her lips together, breathed through her nose. Jaemin, she said. Her voice was steady and terrible. He knew. He had to have known, Adeyeze said from the laptop screen. The alterations were requested. Someone had to specify what to change and in what direction. The clinic administrator we've been in contact with has indicated willingness to cooperate with a formal inquiry. She says she was told the changes came from the family. He knew, Amara said again. Not a question this time, just the truth, out loud, taking up space in the world where it had never been allowed to before. Cassian crouched down in front of her so that he was level with her face. It was not a gesture she expected from him. He put his hands on the arms of her chair, not touching her, just bracketing, and he looked at her directly. What do you want to do? He asked. What do I... She stopped, looked at him. What do you mean, what do I want? I have lawyers who can have an injunction filed by morning. I have financial resources that can make the Kwan family's quarter very unpleasant very quickly. I have contacts in the press who owe me and who would find this story significantly more interesting than the one that ran this morning. His voice was absolutely level. But none of that moves without you. It's your story. What do you want to do with it? She looked at him for a long time. No one had ever asked her that. Not once in her adult life had someone with actual power to act looked at her and asked what she wanted to do with it. I want the truth out, she said. Just the truth. Exactly what they did? Exactly how they did it? Exactly how long it went on? No spin. No narrative.
Just the record. Corrected. Cassian nodded, stood up, took out his phone. Areze, he said toward the laptop. What do you need from my legal team? I need your medical record litigation specialist, and I need your forensic accountant to cross-reference the payment records from the clinics against Kwan family accounts, Areze said. If money changed hands for those alterations, we can prove it. You'll have both by 9 a.m. He was already moving. Cassian. Amara's voice stopped him in the doorway. He turned. Why? She said. Legally, this is not your fight. It predates the contract. You don't have to. You are my wife, he said. Flat. Simple. Not because of a contract, because you sat on the floor of my hallway at 2 a.m. for a child who isn't yours, and you told Nora you weren't leaving when every sane person would have, and you stood in a head teacher's office today for my son. He paused, and his voice stayed level, but his eyes did not. If someone built a lie that destroyed 6 years of your life, that is my fight. Because you are in my house, and the people in my house don't get left to burn. She sat very still. He walked out. Amara sat in the kitchen with the Diaze still on the screen and the document still spread across the counter and the half-made dinner going cold. And she pressed her fingers against her mouth and stared at the tabletop and thought about how strange it was. How completely disorienting strange to be protected. To have someone put their body, metaphorically, between her and the thing coming for her. Not because they had to, not because she had asked, but because they had decided she was worth it. She had forgotten that was possible. She had forgotten so thoroughly that it now felt foreign, like hearing a language she used to speak and had let go dormant. Areze said something on the screen. Amara didn't hear it, because her phone was buzzing again. A different number this time, a Korean number she didn't recognize. And when she answered it, a man's voice said he was a journalist from a national investigative outlet. And he said he had been contacted by a source inside the Kwan organization, a source with documents, and he wanted her comment before he filed. What documents? She said. He told her. Her hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles went pale, because the documents he described were not about her. They were about Jaemin, specifically about Jaemin's own medical records. Records from a private clinic in Busan that he had visited before the marriage, before Amara, when he had apparently consulted a specialist about a condition he had been diagnosed with at 24 years old that meant he had never, under any circumstances, been capable of fathering a child. Not possibly. Not probably. Never. The fertility problem in the Kwan marriage had not been hers. It had never been hers. It had been his, known to him before she arrived, and he had married her with that knowledge. And then he had paid 4 doctors to make sure the world believed otherwise. She sat on the kitchen floor. She didn't plan to. Her legs simply stopped working, and she sat down, and the phone was still in her hand, and the journalist was still talking, and the room was very bright and very loud in a way that had nothing to do with actual sound, just the internal noise of a world being reorganized at its foundations. 6 years. 6 years she had carried something that was never hers to carry. She was 31 years old, and she was sitting on the kitchen floor of a house that had slowly, improbably, started to feel like something real, and she held the phone to her ear, and outside the kitchen door she could hear Micah's footsteps on the stairs, and Nora's voice saying something sharp to Elias, and the particular sound of this family in motion, this family that had somehow become her business, her responsibility, and she understood with a clarity that was almost violent that she had a choice about what happened next. She could let the grief of what had been done to her swallow everything. She could let it retroactively poison every year behind her and every day in front of her. She could give Jaemin Kwan and his family the thing they had always wanted from her, her collapse, her absence, her disappearance from any story that mattered. Or she could stand up. She stood up. "Tell me," she said into the phone, "exactly what you need from me to run this story correctly." The story ran at 11 p.m. that same night. Amara knew the exact moment it went live because her phone went from buzzing intermittently to vibrating continuously, a sustained tremor in her hand like holding something alive. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she had made and not drunk, and Cassian was across from her with his laptop open, and they had both been waiting without saying they were waiting. The silence between them pulled taut as wire. He saw it first. She watched his face. Cassian Ryker's face was not an expressive instrument under normal conditions. She had learned to read the small things, the jaw, the eyes, the specific quality of his stillness when something mattered. What happened in his face when he read the headline was not small. It moved through him like weather, fast and total. And when it was done, he looked up at her, and the expression that remained was the one she had seen only once before, in the kitchen when she told him about Elias at school. Stripped of management, just the raw thing underneath. "Read it," she said. He turned the laptop toward her. The headline was Kwon Jae-min's Secret, How Korea's Most Powerful Family Bought 6 Years of Silence and Destroyed an Innocent Woman to Buy It. She read the whole piece, every word, twice. She read it with the particular focus of someone reading about their own life written by someone else. The cognitive dissonance of recognizing every fact while the narrative surrounding those facts felt alien, felt too large, felt like something that had happened to a different woman, even though she knew with absolute bodily certainty that it had happened to her. The clinic in Busan. Jaemin's records, dated 8 months before their wedding. The diagnosis. The specialist's name. The payment trail connecting the Kwon family accounts to the 4 clinics that had treated Amara during the marriage. The specific numbers from the archived raw data versus the altered official reports. Arayez was quoted by name. The clinic administrator who had cooperated was quoted anonymously. The forensic accountant Cassian had provided had worked for 11 hours straight, and the payment documentation was airtight. At the bottom of the article, there was one line from Amara, just one. She had given the journalist exactly one sentence when he asked for comment. It read, "The only thing I ever wanted was the truth, and now it exists." She closed the laptop. The notifications kept coming. "We should sleep," Cassian said. "I'm not going to sleep." "No," he agreed. "Neither am I." They sat together in the kitchen and didn't sleep and didn't talk much. And somewhere around 1 in the morning, Cassian got up and made eggs, which surprised her, and they ate eggs at 1 a.m. at the kitchen table like 2 people who have been through something together and are still figuring out what to call it. By morning, the story had been picked up by every major Korean outlet and 7 international ones. By noon, it was trending in 4 countries. By 3 p.m., the Kwon family's publicist had released a statement calling the reporting defamatory and agenda-driven, and announcing their intention to pursue legal action. And by 4:30, that statement had been dissected and mocked so thoroughly on social media that the publicist deleted it, which only made everything worse. Jaemin Kwon did not make a public statement. That silence, Amara understood, was its own kind of answer. The gala had been scheduled for 3 weeks. Cassian mentioned it the morning after the story broke, standing in the kitchen doorway in his work clothes, coffee in hand, and he said it the way people mention appointments they are internally debating canceling. "The CO Foundation charity event," he said. "Saturday. We're supposed to attend." "I know," she said. She had seen it on the household calendar. "Are you asking if I want to go?" "I'm asking if you're ready." She looked at him. "For what specifically?" "The Kwons will be there. They always attend the SEO event. It's a significant fixture on their social calendar. With everything that's happened this week, it's possible they won't come. But," he paused, "it's also possible they will because not coming looks like an admission." She absorbed this. "What do you want to do?" he asked. And there it was again. That question, that specific question from this specific man who kept returning to it as though her wanting things was the most natural starting point in the world. "I'm going," she said. He nodded. "Good." The 3 days between the story and the gala were not quiet. The house had a different texture to it. Not bad, but charged, the way air feels before a shift in weather. The children knew something had happened. Children always know. Operating on the frequencies adults forget they're broadcasting. Nora had come downstairs the morning after the story with an expression that was more complicated than any she'd worn before. Less armor, more genuine uncertainty, like a child who has had the ground shift under a belief she'd held without knowing she held it. She sat down at breakfast and looked at Amara and said, with the bluntness of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned to dress questions up, "The article said someone lied about you." "Yes," Amara said, "for a long time." 6 years. Nora processed this with the visible seriousness she brought to most things. That's almost as long as I've been alive. It is. And they just... She stopped. Her brow furrowed. They just let you think it was your fault? They did. Nora looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up, and there was something in her face that Amara had not seen from her before. Not the armor, not the careful hostility, but something raw. Something that looked like the specific anger of a child who has a more than intellectual understanding of what it feels like when the people who should protect you choose not to. That's really mean, Nora said. 2 words. But the way she said them, with all the weight of a child who has her own private inventory of things that qualify as really mean, landed in Amara's chest somewhere quiet and permanent. It was, Amara said. Nora picked up her toast. Then she said, without looking up, in the careful offhand tone of someone testing a door they're not sure will hold, "Your dress for Saturday. Is it the dark green one?" Amara blinked. "I was thinking the black." Nora considered this with apparent seriousness. "The dark green is better. You look more..." She stopped, seemed to search for a word and settled for "more like yourself." Then she bit into her toast and read the back of the cereal box and said nothing else. And Amara sat with her coffee and thought, there it is. There's the crack she has been waiting for, the one that all the patience and the floor sitting and the coat mud and the not leaving had been building toward. And it had arrived not with fanfare, but with a 7-year-old's opinion about the color green. She wore the dark green dress. The CO Foundation Gala was held in a hotel ballroom in Gangnam that understood exactly what kind of event it was hosting and had arranged itself accordingly. High ceilings, low lighting, the kind of floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And approximately 300 of Seoul's most influential people assembled in their best clothes to be seen being charitable. Cassian moved through rooms like this with the ease of someone who had never once in his life needed to prove he belonged somewhere. And she watched that ease and understood it better now than she had the night they met. It wasn't arrogance, it was simply the complete absence of the particular anxiety that afflicts people who are always waiting to be asked to leave. She moved through it differently. She was aware of people noticing her. She was aware of the recognition, the way eyes would land on her face, and then do the small recalibration of people placing a name to a face they'd seen in a headline. She kept her posture, kept her expression, kept her hand light on Cassian's arm, and her attention moving, and she did not let any of it show. They were 40 minutes in when she saw them. Yaemin was on the far side of the room near the bar, and she saw him before he saw her, which gave her approximately 4 seconds to decide what to do with her face. She used those 4 seconds. By the time his gaze tracked across the room and found her, her expression was entirely composed. He looked older. She noticed that first, with a kind of clinical detachment that surprised her. He looked older and slightly diminished in the specific way people look when a story they've been telling about themselves has been publicly revised. His wife was with him, the woman he had started seeing apparently before the divorce was finalized, a fact the press had covered with enthusiasm. And she was very beautiful and very young, and stood at his side with the smile of someone who had not yet understood what she had married into. His mother was there too, Mrs. Kwon, immaculate and rigid, in a steel-gray gown that suited her perfectly, and she saw Amara at the same moment Jaemin did, and her face did not change at all, which was more hostile than any expression would have been. "At your 9, Cassian said quietly, close to her ear. "I see them. We don't have to..." "I know we don't have to," she said. "Keep moving. We're not going to them, and we're not avoiding them. We're just going to be in this room." He made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement, or might have been the closest he came to approval. They moved toward a group of people Cassian knew from the business community, and conversations happened, and glasses were held, and the evening proceeded with the particular forward momentum of events that have their own gravity. She was talking to the director of a women's health nonprofit, a conversation that had become unexpectedly real, the woman having read the article and having things to say about it that were worth hearing, when she felt the shift in the room. It was subtle, the specific change in ambient noise that happens when a pocket of attention consolidates around something. She turned. Jaemin's mother was walking toward her. Not toward Cassian, toward Amara specifically, with the focused, directional energy of a woman who had decided this was going to happen and had calculated that a crowded ballroom was in fact an advantage because scenes here had consequences. Amara excused herself from the nonprofit director and turned to face Mrs. Kwan directly, because the only thing worse than the confrontation coming was the confrontation catching her from the side. Mrs. Kwan stopped 2 feet away. She was 63 years old and had the posture of a woman who had weaponized her own dignity so long it had become structural. "I think," Mrs. Kwan said, in Korean, and then switched deliberately to English because she knew Amara's Korean was still accented, and she had always used that knowledge precisely. "We should speak privately." "We're fine here," Amara said. A flicker. Very small. "What you've done to this family, what I've done." Amara kept her voice level, but did not keep it warm. "Your son knew before he married me. He knew, and he married me anyway, and then he paid doctors to make sure I believed I was the problem. 6 years, Mrs. Kwan. Your family paid for 6 years of that." "Those allegations are documented," Amara said, forensically, by 3 independent analysts. "Would you like me to list the specific payment amounts and dates? I have them." Mrs. Kwan's composure held, but something behind her eyes shifted. The particular movement of someone whose prepared position has been outflanked before they could deploy it. "You have benefited," Mrs. Kwan said, quieter now, leaning slightly in, "considerably from your time with my son. The education you received—" "I received nothing from your son that I did not pay for with my own—" Amara stopped, breathed, one breath in and out, controlled. "I am done explaining myself to you. I spent 6 years doing that in your house, and I am finished." "You will regret making enemies of us," Mrs. Kwan said, low and even. And that was the moment. The moment that Amara had not planned and did not engineer, and that arrived with a swiftness that came from somewhere below planning, below strategy, below everything she had coached herself into being over 6 years of smallness and 6 weeks of something else entirely. "Look around this room," Amara said. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. "Look at how many people came here tonight and read that article and know exactly what your family did. And then look at me." She held Mrs. Kwan's gaze without blinking. "I'm still here, and I'm standing next to a man who chose to stand next to me. And in 6 months, no one in this room will remember what you're wearing tonight." She paused. "We're done." She turned, started to move. "Amara." Jaemin's voice. She stopped, did not turn immediately, took a half-second that she needed, then turned. He had crossed the room while his mother was speaking. He was standing 5 feet away, and he looked for the first time in her experience of him, uncertain, not guilty. She did not grant him guilt because she was not sure he was capable of it, but uncertain in the way of someone who has had a structure collapse and is not sure where to stand. "I need you to know," he said, "that the decision wasn't entirely—" He stopped. His jaw worked. The family was involved. The pressure at the time was— "Don't," she said. "Amara, don't explain it to me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Not with tears, with the specific fracture of compressed anger finding a hairline exit. "Don't give me reasons. You knew. You stood in front of me every time I came home from a clinic, and you knew, and you said nothing, and you let it keep going for 6 years. She looked at him and felt nothing she expected to feel. Not the old longing, not the old anger that had teeth, just a vast and level clarity. "There is nothing you can say to me. You already said everything. You said it for 6 years by not saying anything at all." She turned and walked away and did not look back. She found Cassian at the edge of the room, near the windows, and she did not know how he had gotten there or how long he had been watching, but she knew from his expression that he had heard enough. She stopped next to him and they stood side by side looking out at the Seoul night, the city lights going all the way to the horizon, and she was aware that her hands were shaking slightly, and she pressed them together in front of her to stop it. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't dismissive either. "I'm all right," she confirmed. A moment. Then he turned to face the room, and his face had the expression she now recognized as his operational face, the one that meant he had made a decision and was implementing it. And he raised his voice to a volume that was not a shout,
but that cut cleanly through the ambient noise of 300 people because Cassian Ryker had a voice that was built for exactly this kind of room. "I'd like a moment," he said. The room did not go immediately silent. It took 4 or 5 seconds, the sound tapering as attention turned, as people who were mid-conversation registered the quality of what they were hearing and stopped. He waited until it was fully quiet. "Most of you know me," he said. "Some of you know my wife." He paused. "All of you have read the news this week. I'm not going to make a speech about it. I'll say one thing." His voice did not waver. "My wife was lied to for 6 years systematically and deliberately by people in this room. She was publicly humiliated. She was made to believe she was less than she is. And she handled all of it with more dignity than anyone in this room would have managed, including me." Another pause. "She is the finest person I know. I am not a man given to announcements, but I want it in this room, in front of these people, that whoever thought they could diminish her was wrong. They will continue to be wrong, and anyone who disagrees with that assessment is welcome to discuss it with me personally." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then it broke into sound. Not applause exactly, at first, more the organic noise of 300 people exhaling simultaneously, and then yes, applause. Genuine and building, and Amara stood beside him and felt the sound come at her like a wave, and felt her throat close completely, and she looked straight ahead because looking at him right now would undo the composure she was holding with both hands. "You didn't have to do that," she said, under the noise. "Yes, I did," he said simply. She looked at him then. She couldn't not. He was looking at her, and the expression on his face was not performance and not strategy, and not the managed distance she had come to expect from him. "Cassian, not here," he said quietly. "Later. But not later." He corrected himself. "I'm in love with you. I've been trying to figure out what to do about that for about 6 weeks, and I've decided the answer is to say it and then continue operating normally." She stared at him. She stopped. "I know it's not the right moment." "No, it's—" She almost laughed. She felt it rise in her throat, involuntary, real laughter, the kind that arrives when the emotional register has been pushed through so many frequencies in one evening that it has lost its ability to select the correct one. "It's the strangest possible moment. I'm not known for timing," he said. She looked at him. This man. This impermeable, controlled, deeply private man who made eggs at 1 a.m. and ordered lavender soap from Busan and stood up in a room of 300 people and said her name like it was worth defending. She took his hand, her fingers through his, just that. In this room full of people who were still watching, still murmuring, still redistributing themselves around the new reality of the evening. "Later," she said. "We'll talk later." "Yes," he said. "But—" She tightened her grip slightly. "For what it's worth. Same." He looked at her. "Same," she said again. His hand tightened around hers. They stood at the edge of the room with Seoul spreading out below the windows and the Kwon family somewhere behind them in the process of making a quiet and permanent exit. And Amara felt, for the first time in so long that she couldn't locate the last time, the specific sensation of standing somewhere not wanting to be somewhere else. They were moving toward the exit 30 minutes later, coats in hand, having made the appropriate farewells and moved through the thinning crowd, when the doors opened ahead of them and Amara's mother walked in. Not her father, just Dora. Alone, without announcement, in a coat that Amara recognized from childhood, slightly out of place in the gala's register of wealth and performance. She saw Amara at the same moment Amara saw her, and she stopped. Dora Voss was 61 years old, and she had the same bone structure as her daughter, and she had always been the more complicated of Amara's parents, not the architect of the decisions that had been made on Amara's behalf, but never quite their opponent either. She stood in the doorway of this ballroom with her hands in her coat pockets, and she looked at her daughter the way you look at something you've broken that you're not sure can be put back. "I saw it," Dora said. "The article. All of it." Amara waited. "I didn't know," her mother said. "About the records. About what they'd done with the doctors." Her voice was careful, trying to be steady. "I want you to know that. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Amara said.
No. But you knew I was hurting. Amara's voice was very controlled. You knew the marriage was damaging me. You could see it every time I came home, and you arranged a second one before the first one was cold. Dora's jaw moved. We thought— I know what you thought, Amara said. You thought I was a resource that needed to be redeployed. She stopped. Something tightened in her chest, not new grief, the old grief, the specific grief of a daughter who needed a mother and kept getting an accountant instead. I came home because I needed my mother, and you gave me a transaction. Amara, I need you to leave, Amara said. Dora's face crumpled at the edges. I am your mother. I know who you are. Her voice went very quiet. I'm asking you to go. The silence lasted long enough to have weight. Then Dora looked at Cassian, a long, unreadable look, and looked back at her daughter, and her mouth opened and closed once. Then she turned and walked back out the door. Amara stood looking at the closed door for 3 seconds. Then she breathed, long, out through her nose, in through her mouth. Cassian was beside her, not touching, just there, at the exact correct distance, and she understood that he had calibrated this deliberately, close enough that she knew he was there, far enough that the moment was still hers. You all right? He said. No, she said honestly, but I will be. He nodded. They walked out into the Seoul night together, and behind them the gala continued without them, and the Kwan family's table sat empty, and somewhere in the city a news cycle was turning that would not stop turning for weeks, and Amara Voss walked down the front steps of the Seo Foundation gala in her dark green dress, with her hand in her husband's hand, and the cold night air hitting her face, and she thought, this is the part where it changes. Everything that comes next is different from everything that came before. She did not know yet what different meant. She did not know about the morning 3 months from now when she would stand in the bathroom at 5 a.m. with a test in her hand and her knees going weak. She did not know about Elias's voice breaking on a word she never expected to hear from him. She did not know about Nora's drawing, the one the school would send home in a folder, a crayon family portrait in which there would be exactly 5 figures, and above the tallest female figure, in Nora's careful 7-year-old hand, 1 word. She did not know any of that yet. She knew only the cold air, and the lights, and the hand in hers, and the fact that for the first time in 6 years she was walking out of something instead of being walked out of it, and that the difference between those two things was everything. Behind them, on the other side of the ballroom's glass facade, the last thing she saw before the car came was Mrs. Kwan standing at the bar alone, her steel gray gown immaculate, her face composed, holding a glass she was not drinking from, surrounded by people who were very carefully not looking at her. Amara looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then the car arrived, and she got in, and she did not look back. The car ride home was quiet, not the taut, loaded quiet of the early weeks in that house, the kind that had texture and threat. This was different, the quiet of 2 people who have been through the same storm from opposite sides and come out on the same shore, worn down to something truer than they started with. The city moved past the windows in streaks of light, and Amara watched it without seeing it, and Cassian sat beside her with his hand still loosely holding hers, neither of them gripping, just contact, just the simple fact of 2 hands in the same space by mutual agreement. She thought about her mother, about the way Dora's face had crumpled at the edges and then composed itself and then turned away. She had known, as she watched her mother walk back through those doors, that the conversation was not over, that there was a longer reckoning coming, slower and more complicated than anything that had happened in that ballroom. But she also knew something she had not known 6 weeks ago, which was that she no longer needed to rush toward it. She could let it come at its own speed. She had stopped being afraid of uncomfortable things arriving. Mrs. Yoon had left the kitchen light on. The house was quiet inside, the children asleep, and Amara stood in the front hallway in her coat and listened to the house breathe. The particular sound of a building occupied by people who were resting, small and safe. And she felt the evening begin to leave her body slowly, like water draining, the tension of it going out through the soles of her feet. "Coffee?" Cassian said behind her. "No, tea." He went to the kitchen. She hung up her coat. She stood in the hallway for another moment, just standing, just being in the fact of being home, and then she followed him. He was filling the kettle when she came in, and she sat at the table and watched him move in his own kitchen with the unself-consciousness of a man who has lived alone long enough that domesticity has stopped performing and become just motion. He set the kettle on, got 2 mugs, found the tea without looking, by memory. "Say it," she said. He turned, looked at her. "What you're thinking. You've been thinking it since the car. Just say it." He turned back to the counter, was quiet for a moment. "The Quan legal team filed something tonight. My lawyer called while you were getting your coat. A preemptive defamation claim against the outlet that ran the story, against a Daeze, and—" He stopped. "Against me," she said. "Yes." She absorbed this. "How serious?" "Not very. The documentation we have makes their position extremely difficult to sustain." He turned around and leaned against the counter. "But it means a process. Months, possibly longer. They know they can't win. They're making it expensive to be right." "That's what they do," she said. "That's always what they've done." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to know that I have resources committed to this for as long as it takes. That's not a negotiation. It's already decided. Cassian, let me finish." He said it quietly. "I need to say this correctly, and I don't say things this way often, so I need you to let me finish." He came to the table, sat down across from her, put his hands flat on the surface between them, not reaching for her, just grounded. "When Serena died, I shut everything down. Everything that wasn't the children, wasn't work, wasn't what was immediately necessary. I told myself it was efficiency. I told myself the children needed stability, and stability meant containment, and containment meant I didn't—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I didn't feel things where they could affect operations." She waited. "You walked into this house," he said, "and you sat on the floor of a hallway at 2 a.m. for my son. And you stood in a doorway and told my daughter you saw her. And you didn't ask me for anything. You didn't ask me to be different or to feel things or to—" He stopped again, looked at his hands. "I have been in love with you for weeks, and I have been treating it like a liability to be managed, and I am tired of managing it." The kettle began to sound behind him, a low building note. Neither of them moved. "I know what I am," he said. "I'm not easy. I know I'm not easy. I have 3 children who have been through something that left marks, and I have—" He made a short, imprecise gesture. "I have my own marks. I am telling you that completely and without—" "Cassian." Her voice was very soft. He stopped. "I know who you are," she said. "I have been watching you for 6 weeks. I know who you are." He looked at her. "I love you too," she said. Simple, flat, and real. Not performed, not dressed up, just the bare fact of it laid on the table between them like something she'd been carrying in her coat pocket and was finally setting down. "I think I've been trying not to for a while because loving people has not worked out well for me historically, and I am—" She exhaled. "I am not very brave about it." "You are the bravest person I know," he said. "That is not an opinion." "About some things," she said. "Not that one." He reached across the table, put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and let her fingers close around his, and they sat like that while the kettle came fully to the boil behind him and began to make noise, and he got up and made the tea without letting go of her hand until he had to. 3 days later, Amara drove to her parents' house. She did not tell Cassian where she was going, not because she was hiding it, but because she needed to do it as herself, not as a Ryker, not with the implicit weight of that name and its resources behind her. This belonged to Amara Voss, the woman before all of it, the woman who had grown up in that house and learned in it what she was worth and had spent the following years slowly, expensively discovering that the lesson had been wrong. Her father answered the door. Edmund Voss was 64 and had the look of a man who had not slept well since a story broke 3 days ago that had upended several of his private calculations. He looked at his daughter on the front step and he stepped back to let her in without a word, which was its own kind of statement. Her mother was in the sitting room. Dora stood up when Amara came in and sat back down immediately, as if she couldn't decide which version of herself to be. Amara sat in the chair across from them that she had sat in all her life. The house smelled the same as it always had. Cooking oil and the specific laundry detergent her mother had used for 40 years, and the faint must of books her father left in stacks everywhere. She had loved this smell. She had associated it with safety for most of her childhood. She had come home to it after Korea and sat in this room, and in 48 hours, it had stopped meaning safety and started meaning something she didn't have a word for. She looked at her parents. "I'm not here to have a fight," she said. "I want to be clear about that first." Her father sat down slowly in his armchair. "I'm here because there are things I need to say, and I need to say them once, clearly, and then I need to decide how I'm going to feel about you both going forward, and I can't do that with things unsaid." Dora's hands were folded in her lap. They pressed together, slightly, at the knuckles. "You sold me," Amara said. The words were not dramatic in her mouth. They were just words for a true thing. "I know that's a hard way to say it, but that's what happened. I came home from a marriage that had been systematically dismantling me for 6 years, and before I had unpacked my suitcase, you had arranged to sell me to the next situation." She paused. "You didn't ask if I was all right. You asked if I could be useful." Edmund opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," Amara said. He closed it. "The business debt," she said. "I know it was real. I know the pressure was real. I'm not saying you invented a crisis to manipulate me. I believe the crisis was genuine. But you looked at your crisis, and then you looked at your daughter, and you made a calculation. And the calculation was that I was the available resource." She kept her voice even. "It cost her, but she kept it. And what I need you to understand is that that calculation was not new. You had been making it my whole life. The school you chose for me because it had good connections. The men you introduced me to because they had prospects. The way you talked about Jamin before I married him. Not whether he was kind, not whether he was honest, but whether he was established." She paused. "I learned from you what I was worth, and what I learned was that I was worth what I could produce for the people around me. And that lesson," her voice went briefly thin. She held it. "That lesson cost me 6 years and nearly cost me everything." Her mother's eyes were wet. Amara noted this without moving toward it. "I don't hate you," Amara said. "I want to be clear about that too. You are my parents, and I have enough of you in me to know that you genuinely believed you were doing right by me. That is exactly what makes it so hard." She looked at them both. "But I need you to understand that I am not available to be managed anymore. I am not a resource. I am not a liability. I am your daughter, and if you want to be in my life going forward, that is the only way I exist." The sitting room was very still. "I know what we did," Dora said finally. Her voice was rough at the edges. "I knew it when we were doing it. I told myself—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I told myself you would land somewhere good, and you did, and I told myself that justified—" She stopped again. "It didn't. I know it didn't." Amara looked at her mother, at the bone structure she had inherited, and the eyes that were the same eyes, and the 61 years of a woman who had made choices that were comprehensible and wrong simultaneously, which was the most complicated kind of wrong there was. "I know," Amara said. "Can you—" Dora started, stopped. The sentence didn't seem to have an ending she was willing to commit to. "I don't know yet," Amara said honestly. "I'm not closing the door, but I need time. And I need you to give me that time without pressure, without calls, without—" She looked at her father, "without business conversations. If I call you, I'll call you. Until then, wait." Edmund looked at his hands. He was a man who expressed remorse the way people express it when they learned remorse late in life, awkwardly, without the vocabulary for it, like moving furniture in a house you've lived in too long to see clearly anymore. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out flat, and she knew the flatness was not absence of feeling, but the opposite, feeling that had nowhere practice to go. She stood up, picked up her bag. "I know," she said again, and then, "I'll call." She drove home. The city went past. She was not crying, and she was not numb. She was in that particular clear space between grief and the territory that comes after grief, where you can see things as they are without the distortion of either pain or its absence.
She was 31 years old, and she had parents who loved her badly, and an ex-husband who had lied to her for 6 years, and a family she had walked into as a transaction and would walk back to as something she did not yet have the right word for, and the road went straight, and she drove it. The Kwan legal claim collapsed 9 weeks later. Not dramatically. It deflated, the way things deflate when the air goes out slowly rather than all at once. The clinic administrator's cooperation proved more damaging than the Kwan legal team had anticipated. The payment records Cassian's forensic accountant had reconstructed were clean and specific and completely irrefutable. 2 of the 4 doctors whose names were on Amara's falsified reports agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced professional sanctions. When the 3rd one followed, the 4th became irrelevant. Adez called Amara on a Tuesday morning to tell her it was over. Amara was in the garden with a cup of coffee, watching the way the early light came through the trees at the angle it only hit in late autumn, and she stood there with the phone to her ear and Adeze's voice saying words like settlement and retraction and formal acknowledgement, and she felt, not triumph. She had expected triumph, and it wasn't that. It was quieter than that. It was something closer to the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying so long, you forgot it was heavy, and finding that your arms still ache even when the weight is gone. "Thank you," she said to Adeze, "for all of it." "You did the hard part," Adeze said. "I just followed the money." "That's not nothing," Amara said. "No," Adeze agreed. "It really isn't." Jamin Kwan made a public statement 2 days after his family's legal claim was withdrawn. It was written by a professional, and it was careful, and it used the word regret 3 times in 4 paragraphs, which told Amara everything she needed to know about how much of it he had written himself. She read it once, did not respond to the press request that followed asking for her reaction, filed it in the same internal place she had filed the airport photograph, and the original headline, and the 6 years of clinic appointments she had attended alone, and she left it there. She did not forgive Jamin Kwan. She did not decide to forgive him and then fail. She simply found when she went looking for the necessary machinery that it wasn't there yet, and she decided not to force it. Forgiveness that was manufactured for moral tidiness was not forgiveness. It was performance. She had enough experience with performance. She would find the real thing in her own time, or she wouldn't, and either way she was going to be all right. The morning she found out she was pregnant was a Thursday. She had not been trying, she had not been not trying. The question of her own fertility had become, in the months since the truth came out, something she held at a careful distance. Not because she was afraid of hoping, but because she had learned in the hardest possible school what hope that attaches to a specific outcome can do to you when the outcome doesn't arrive. So she had not hoped specifically. She had just lived. She was in the bathroom at 5:17 in the morning, standing in the cold tile light with the test in her hand when the result appeared. She stood there for a very long time. The result did not change. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub and looked at it, and the thing that moved through her was not the explosive joy of movies, not the gasping disbelief. It was something slower and deeper. Something that came up from a place that had been closed for a long time and opened now without drama, the way a room opens when you finally find the key you'd stopped looking for. She was going to have a child. She, Amara Voss, the woman the world had called barren, had called defective, had called a woman with a pattern. She was going to have a child, and the quiet irony of that fact sat with her in the bathroom in the early morning dark, and she let it sit. She went back to the bedroom. Cassian was asleep. She stood at the side of the bed looking at him. This man who had been a stranger 5 months ago, who had offered her a contract when what she needed was a chance, who had slowly and with great personal difficulty become the safest place she knew. And she felt the fullness of this moment and knew she didn't want to rush it. She touched his shoulder. He came awake the way he always did, fast and complete, no intermediate state. He looked at her, saw her face, sat up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said. "Nothing is wrong." He read her face for a moment in the dim light. Then his eyes moved to her hand where she was still holding the test, and she watched him see it and watched his face do something she had never seen it do, completely, entirely open, all the management gone, just the man inside, which was a very good man.
and he was looking at her the way people look when they have been given something they know they don't deserve and are more grateful for that reason rather than less. Amara, he said, just her name. Yeah, she said. He reached out and put his hand against her face, and she leaned into it, and they stayed there in the quiet early morning, just that. Just the two of them in the half-dark with everything that was coming still ahead of them. It was Elias who asked to tell his siblings. He had overheard, Amar suspected he had overheard, because Elias Ryker moved through the house with the practiced quietness of a child who had learned early that information was protection, and he was always in the vicinity of important conversations without quite appearing to be. He came to find her in the library that afternoon and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and said, without preamble, "Can I tell them?" She looked at him. "You heard?" "I wasn't trying to." "I know," she said. She studied him. This boy, this complicated, careful, fierce boy who had called her mom before he knew he was doing it and had been building towards something ever since. What would you tell them? He thought about it seriously. That we're getting a new one, he said, and then, slightly quieter, but that they won't be less. She felt her throat close. You won't be less, she said. None of you will ever be less. He nodded once, with the brevity of someone who needed to hear it, and now that he'd heard it was done needing it. Okay, he said. Can I tell them? Yes, she said. You can tell them. He went. She heard from the library the sound of doors opening and Nora's voice rising in a sound that she needed a moment to identify as uncomplicated delight. Nora, who had moved mud on coats and relocated toiletry bags and told Amara with 7-year-old precision that everyone leaves, producing a sound of uncomplicated delight. And then Micah's voice higher and faster, asking questions, and Elias's voice underneath it all, steady and sure, explaining. Cassian appeared in the library doorway. He had heard it too. He leaned in the frame with his arms crossed and his eyes on the middle distance where some private thing was resolving, and he was quiet for a long moment. She's laughing, he said. He meant Nora. I know, Amara said. He looked at her. Are you all right? I keep getting asked that. You keep being in situations that warrant it. She almost smiled. Almost. I'm more than all right, she said. I just need a minute to let it be real. He nodded, gave her the minute. That was the thing about Cassian Ryker, the thing she had learned slowly and could now see completely. He understood the value of not filling space. Most people, when they cared about you, filled space. They rushed in with comfort and words and presence because the silence of someone else's feeling was too much to sit with. Cassian sat with it. He gave it room. She had come to understand that this was his version of tenderness, as real and specific to him as any other person's more visible expression of it. The minute ended. She stood up. He moved out of the doorway to let her through, and then fell into step beside her down the hallway toward the sound of his children, and they walked together toward whatever the sound was, neither of them in a hurry, both of them going the same direction. The moment with Elias came 6 days later, on a Sunday morning. He came down to breakfast before his siblings, which was unusual, and he sat across from Amara with a glass of juice and said nothing for a while, and she let him not say it because she had learned his rhythms, learned that Elias needed the approach to be on his terms, or not at all. Then he said, I've been thinking about something. Okay, she said. When the baby comes. He was looking at his juice glass. There's going to be, he paused, searching, there's going to be a difference between us and the baby, because we're not, he stopped. His jaw moved. He was working on something hard, and he was going to get there without help if she didn't rush him. Because you didn't come from me, she said quietly. He looked up. Yeah. And you're wondering what that means. I'm wondering if it changes things. His voice was very controlled and very young simultaneously, the two registers of him she heard most often, now that she knew how to listen. For you, for how you... He stopped again. She set down her coffee cup, leaned forward slightly. Elias, look at me. He did.
I have sat on the floor of this house at 2 in the morning, she said. I have driven to your school and stood in a head teacher's office and come home and made dinner and done it again the next day. I have been here every morning that I said I would be here, not because there's a document that says I have to be, because you are, all three of you are. She stopped, found the right words. You are the first people in my adult life who showed me what it cost to stay and then showed me what it was worth. She held his gaze. The baby coming doesn't divide anything. It adds. That's all it does. He held her gaze for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes that were so completely his father's and so completely his own. Can I call you Mom? He said. Not the first time she'd heard it. She'd heard it indirectly, overheard it said to his sibling and sideways to a stranger at school. But this was the first time he'd said it to her face, direct, looking at her, asking for something he wanted and not pretending he didn't want it. Her throat did what it had been doing for months in this house, whenever something moved through it that was larger than her control. Yes, Sitz, she said. You can call me that. He nodded, looked back at his juice. Okay, he said, with the businesslike brevity of a boy who had finished the necessary transaction and could now proceed with breakfast. She pressed her hand flat on the table for a moment, just feeling the cool solidity of it beneath her palm. Then she poured more coffee and the morning continued. Nora took longer. Nora always took longer because Nora was the one who felt things most completely and defended against that feeling most strenuously, and the longer you held a position in Nora Ryker's world, the more it cost you to move. But Nora was also, underneath all the armor, the most precise person Amara had ever known. Precise in her loyalty, precise in her affection when she finally let it out, precise in the way she decided things and then committed to them entirely. It came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the Sunday conversation with Elias. Amara was in the kitchen when Nora came home from school and walked directly to her and held out a folded piece of paper with the expression of someone delivering a classified document. Amara unfolded it. It was a drawing, crayon, on school paper, a house with trees, 5 figures standing in the garden. Nora's careful hand had labeled each figure, Daddy, Elias, Micah, Baby, with a small circle for emphasis, and the tallest female figure, in green crayon because Nora had been paying attention, labeled in letters that had clearly been written and rewritten until they were exactly right. The label said, Mom. Amara stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the drawing and did not try to hold the feeling back. She didn't cry, or she did briefly, the involuntary kind, 1 or 2, and then done. And she looked at Nora, who was watching her with the evaluating directness she had brought to every interaction from the very first day. And Amara said, This is the best thing I've been given in a long time. Nora considered this. Then she said, I worked on the lettering. I can see that, Amara said. It shows. Nora accepted this as her due and went upstairs to do her homework. The drawing went on the refrigerator. It was still there months later when Cassian came home from work and added a new photograph to the collection beside it, taken in the hospital the day after the baby arrived, a girl they named Senna, with Serena's first syllable honored and carried forward, because Cassian had asked and Amara had said yes immediately, because some things deserved to be remembered, and the woman who had loved these children first was one of them. In the photograph, Amara was in the hospital bed, and the baby was in her arms, and Elias was on one side and Nora was on the other, and Micah was sitting at her feet because there wasn't room anywhere else, and his face was turned toward the baby with an expression of complete and absolute wonder. Cassian was not in the photograph. He had taken it. Later, when he showed it to her, she said, Get in the next one. He said, I'm usually the one with the phone. She said, Give Mrs. Yoon the phone. Yeah. He gave Mrs. Yoon the phone, and there is a photograph from 3 minutes later in which all 6 of them are in the frame, and Cassian is sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with his arm around Amara's shoulder, and he is looking not at the camera but at her, and the expression on his face is the one she had been learning to read for 6 months, the one that cost him, the one he had learned late and held completely, the one that meant, Here, this is where I am. This is where I intend to remain. She put that photograph on the refrigerator too, next to Nora's drawing. 2 years later, Amara was in the garden on a Saturday afternoon in October when she understood that she had arrived somewhere. Not finished, she had stopped believing in finished, the way she had stopped believing in the clean resolutions that turned out to be just resting places between the next hard thing. Life was not finished. It was continuous, and it was difficult, and it extracted costs that surprised you, and it also produced, without warning, moments so specific in their goodness that you couldn't have invented them if you tried. She understood that now. She had purchased that understanding at a price she would not recommend. But she was in the garden on an October Saturday, and Elias was at the far end kicking a football against the wall with the focused aggression of a boy who was going to be very tall and was beginning to know it. Nora was on the bench near the roses with a book held at the specific aggressive angle of a child who is technically reading and actually listening to everything happening around her.
Micah was on the grass with Senna, who was 14 months old and committed, with the total physical confidence of a child who has never known anything but complete security, to the project of learning to walk, lurching and catching herself, and lurching again with great determination, while Micah spotted her with a patience that would have surprised anyone who didn't know him the way Amara now knew him, completely and specifically, and with the particular tenderness of someone who has recognized a kindred spirit in a very small person. Cassian was beside her. He had come out with 2 cups of coffee 10 minutes ago and had not gone back inside, which was itself a kind of statement. This man, for whom stillness had always required justification, choosing it simply because she was here and this was pleasant. She looked at the garden, at these people, at the unremarkable Saturday afternoon with its cold October light and its coffee and its small girl lurching across the grass toward her brothers. "Cassian," she said. "I used to think home was the place you came from," she said. "That it was something that already existed somewhere, and you either had it or you spent your life looking for it." He turned his head toward her slightly. "I was wrong about that," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked back at the garden, at the 5 people in it who were his and hers and theirs and nobody else's. "Yes," he said, "you were." Sina took 3 unassisted steps toward Micah, and then sat down hard in the grass and looked up with an expression of complete astonishment at herself. And Micah laughed. The real laugh, the full one, the one she had not heard from him until weeks after the lavender soap arrived. And Elias looked up from the football, and Nora looked up from the book. And for one moment, all 4 of them were looking at the same small person in the same October light, this child who had arrived into an already made family and been received by it without condition. And the sound of Micah's laughter crossed the garden and reached Amara where she stood with her coffee going cold in her hand. She had been sold. She had been lied to. She had been discarded and blamed and made to carry a shame that was never hers to carry. She had come to the other side of all of that not clean. There was no clean. She had given up on clean, but intact. More intact, in fact, than when she started, because the people who had tried to reduce her had only clarified what could not be reduced. She had not built this life to prove anything to the people who had underestimated her. She had built it because she was still standing after they were done, and because standing required a place to stand, and because this place, improbably and specifically and completely, was hers. Senna looked up from the grass directly at Amara, across the October garden with her father's dark eyes and whatever was already entirely her own, and she raised both arms in the universal and total demand of a child who wants to be picked up right now, immediately, without negotiation. Amara set down her coffee, crossed the garden, picked her daughter up out of the grass and held her against her chest, and felt the small warm weight of her and the small warm hands gripping her collar, and she looked up at the sky above the Seongbukdong roofline and breathed. In, out. The garden held. The afternoon held. The people in it stayed. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.